So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to our side event today on the support opportunities that are available to developing country parties for climate change reporting. So we are delighted to have with us today some of the key actors that play quite a critical role in providing the much needed support to developing country parties that they need. And as developing countries start implementing their NDCs and take steps to prepare for reporting under the ETF, a key focus for them will be to enhance their existing capacities in order to track their progress and report on their climate ambitions and actions. They will therefore want to tap into the opportunities available to enhance those capacities. So our speakers here today will share with you what they have been doing to support developing countries. So today we are going to have 2 rounds of panelists who will join me on stage. So the first round will be on the theme of support for enhancing climate change reporting. And the second round will be a little more technical, the technical support to enhance inventory and mitigation reporting. So after each round, we will have a Q&A session, a very brief Q&A session where the audience will be able to ask our key actors, panelists here today, any questions. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the first round of panelists. We have Dr. Chizuru Aoki from the Global Environment Facility, Ms. Fatima Zahra Taibi, who is joining us via the virtual platform from the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Change Center, and Dr. Henning Worster from ICAT, and Mr. Sumit Prasad from our Council on Energy, Environment and Water in India. So I will now give the floor to each of them to greet you, and just a short explanation of what they do before we move to the first presentation. Please start.
Thank you so much, Marlon, and thank you for inviting the GF to this side event. My presentation is going to be talking about our ongoing support for MRV arrangements, as well as on the Enhanced Transparency Framework. And I will also finish by indicating the resource availability for the new phase of the GEF that will start from July 1 of 2022. Next slide, please. So, assuming that the slides will be made available to the audience later, I'm not going to go through all the details of this. This is just a snapshot of the support that Jeff has been providing for the 2 key reports under the MRV system. One is for biennium update reports, the BURs. The next one is the national communications NCs. So for the BURs, we have been supporting them since 2012. They now have a set aside resources per country of $352,000. We have supported 203 BURs in 132 countries. And the graph you see on the bottom will show you how many countries have received support and how many countries have submitted them already. So from BUR1 all the way to BUR5, BUR5 being the latest one. Because we have been transitioning to the ETF, Enhanced Transparency Framework, we have phased out the support for BURs at the end of 2021. So all the countries are now being encouraged to move on to the BTRs, which I will talk about in my presentation. On the national communications, the current agreed set-aside resources is $500,000. To date, we have supported close to 500 national communications. 152 countries have submitted them. And once again, in the reporting period, from July of last year until now, we have supported 6 more national communications. And the graph below also shows you which countries have received support for which report and how many have submitted them. Next, please. So, because most of us are here really wanting to understand the arrangement for enhanced transparency framework, I'm going to talk about the two elements of the enhanced transparency framework. One is on the support for BNM transparency report, BTRs, and I also talk about the capacity building initiative for transparency, which is the capacity side of the ETF. On the BTRs, for the GEF, we were given guidance to start supporting the BTRs, and the timely provision of support for BTRs, especially the first BTR, is a big priority for us. So far, we have approved support for 19 BTRs and 18 countries since the rollout of the BTR support came about, and every technically clear proposal obviously gets supported. As of June 8 of 2022, that's yesterday, we have a request for and approved 9 standalone first BTR. 8 countries requested the combination of the first BTR and national communications. And 1 country requested a combination of first and second BTR, as well as the 5th national communication and the 5th BUR. So just one big package. So to date, we have allocated close to $17 million from the GEF 7 resources for the provision of support for BTRs. What we have until the end of the so-called GEF 7 period, we have 3 more weeks till the end of the GEF 7 period. So we're sort of in the last sprint to get as many as clear as possible. We have what we call an umbrella program that we're working with UNEP, and that will have an opportunity to support a large number of countries to start working on their BTRs. So far, 25 countries came to say they want to be part of that BTR umbrella. There is room to add 23, Esteban, 23? Yeah, or so, more countries under that umbrella. So that package will be part of the work program that the GEF Council will hopefully approve in 2 weeks. So once that goes, we will have an opportunity to support a large number of countries as an umbrella program. In addition, we do have a number of standalone requests for the BTR support, and our expectation is all of them that have been submitted to us for the GEF 7 period, we will work with the countries and agencies to make sure they will be cleared, so they get the support to move ahead. You can see the map, countries with already approved BTR support in the dark blue. Light gray is the countries that have proposals under review. And obviously, the umbrella program countries will have more because there will be room for countries that have not decided what to do to still join that. Next, please. So the other side of the ETF is a capacity building initiative for transparency. This came out of the Paris Agreement decision. And the decision says countries can request support for the CBIT upon request. So what we have done so far, since this started in 2016, every technically clear proposal that is submitted by the country has been supported. There has not been any wait. We have, in the GEF 7 period, received more requests than the original notional allocation for the CBIT. We have made provision to support those extra projects because we did not want to hold up the process. And we want to make sure that we're in line with the Paris Agreement decision. So far, we have 84 projects totaling close to $140 million. Close to 90% of the projects are actually under implementation. Some have already finished. If you look at the regional distribution, it's fairly mirroring, if you will, all the country distributions of the eligible developing countries. We also have 5 global projects to enhance knowledge exchange sector capacity, particularly in sectors where we know that extra support might be needed to really enhance the reporting as well as quantification of emissions, such as agriculture as well as forestry sectors. We've put the numbers on the LDCs. And I would also put one of the interesting things about the CBIT support is that the countries have gone to a wider number of different agencies that can help the countries. Typically for reporting, it has been UNEP and UNDP. For the CBIT, we have agencies like Conservation International, FAO. FECO is a nationally accredited agency for the GEF, as well as IDB. So it's good to see a wide variety of agencies that countries are wanting to work with to build the capacity and have the institutional support. And the graphs on the bottom will show you the share of non-Annex 1 parties that have received support. And we just use the non-Annex 1 because it's a little bit clear for us to show in the graph. And the percentage of total non-Annex 1 greenhouse gas emissions that are now covered under the CBIT efforts. So I think the graphs will show that we're making progress. We will continue to do more. Next slide, please. These are the key support elements of the CBIT. We are keeping track of what countries are coming to us to ask, request support for. Most projects are asking for support for technical capacity building. That's no surprise. For mitigation, as well as the enhancement of inventory. You know, sometimes it could be enhancement of inventory structure. It could be something related to the emission factors or building of the capacity of the personnel to use the tools as well as the methodology is available. At COP26, CMA3 actually provided guidance to the GEF, including on providing additional information on establishing and enhancing what's called a reporting system. And while there is no real agreed definition of what comprises a reporting system, it's generally understood to align with elements that are also supported under the CBIT, such as institutional arrangement for national inventories and institutional arrangement for tracking, mitigation, adaptation, and support, and so forth. So we're sort of looking into the countries that are actually receiving this system elements. And you can see it in here. Quite a number of countries are requesting support for institutional arrangement for mitigation and so on and so forth. And last, but I would add, a third of the projects that we have on the portfolio are requesting support for the NDC enhancements as well as policy design and policy alignments. So there's a reporting element as well as a forward-looking NDCs. How do we make sure they match up? I think 2 more slides. Evolution of global support. I'm not going to say too much about this because we have a UNEP CCC colleague who hopefully will talk about this. Many of you might be aware of the Global Support Program, which we had rolled out, and that was for the provision of capacity and technical support for national communications and BURs. As we're transitioning towards the ETF, we do have a new platform, and it's consolidated because it didn't make sense to have the national communications and BUR platform and the CBIT support. So those are coming together, those have come together, and there's a unified support platform and program for Articles 13 altogether. And from the GEF side, they're ready to be implemented. The concept as well as full proposals have been already approved. GEF 8 outlook very quickly. GEF 8 will start July 1 for the next 4 years. There has been a robust increase for the entire package for the GEF Trust Fund to about $5.3 billion. And there has been a good increase for the climate change mitigation focal area. CBIT will have $75 million of notional allocation in GEF 8. It's an increase from the amount we have for the current period. And also for the reporting on the BTRs, we're setting aside $145 million in GEF 8 to support the BTRs. And our estimations do show this should be enough to cover all the countries coming to us to request support the BTRs in single or bundled formats. ETF support, as you can see, there has been growing demand for CBIT and BTR towards the deadline. It's just around the corner. And we will also start to having conversations on how can we continue to support CBIT for the countries that are almost done or finished with the first phase of CBIT. It's not a one project and we're done with it. This is more or less a perpetual continuous support that we anticipate to see. So in GEF 8, we will definitely get into the phase of supporting additional countries or the second phase of the CBIT for countries that already have received support. And we are also rolling out enhanced costing structure for the BTR support at the start of GIF 8. So that is also in response to the guidance we received in Glasgow. So, last but not least, this is not something, this is a topic that really merits great partnership as well as coordination among different entities as well as different initiatives. So we are very happy to continue to work with countries and partners such as ICAT, PATPA, as well as the bilateral support, as well as the UNFCCC Secretariat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aoki, for sharing with us the steps that the GEF is taking to deepen the financial support that is offered and to enable the technical support through the GEF implementing agencies. Indeed, it is very good to see that parties are also accessing a number of different agencies as well. And as well as requesting or making use out of the modalities to access resources for more than one report. So that's really very good news. And before I go to the next speaker, I just want my two speakers to please introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Marlon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sumit from the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. I look into the matters of transparency and capacity building, and we have been working on the capacity building tool. So my presentation will be surrounding about discussing those capacity building tools. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Pleased to see so many known and unknown faces in the audience. I'm Henning Wüster. I'm the director of ICAT, the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency. And I'll give you a brief overview of ICAT in a moment.
Thank you, panelists. And now I'd like to move to Ms. Fatima Zahra Taibi, who's joining us from virtual platform. And so she will be sharing with us more information on this transition to the global support, from the global support program to the Cbit global support platform. So I hand over to Fatima. Thank you. Fatima, could you please put on your microphone?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Marlon,
can.
you hear me? Yeah, okay, perfect. I'm so sorry for this oversight. So I was just saying that, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's a big pleasure to be here with you today, though virtually. And thank you to the UNFCCC for providing this opportunity to present this one of the main support initiatives for developing countries on transparency. So this initiative is the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, the Global Support Program. So this program is the integration and the continuation of two projects that I think most of you are familiar with. They are the Cbit platform and the Global Support Program, the GSP. So as this project builds on the experience from these two projects and learns from their experience, I would like to take a couple of minutes first to touch upon the legacy of the Global Support Program, its achievements during its first phase of implementation, before diving into the support that will be provided with the new project. So the Global Support Program had started operation in late 2015 and has provided support to more than 140 countries in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean, Europe, and Central Asia through a wide range of activities at national and regional levels. And the program had concluded in September last year. So it had truly global reach and had supported more than 65 countries enhance their national institutional arrangements for climate change reporting. It had organized, co-organized, and co-funded more than 40 regional workshops, 35 national workshops, and more than 60 webinars, counting with the participation of representatives from more than 100 developing countries. So the program also assisted 72 countries in reviewing 52 greenhouse gas inventories, 24 NCs, and 21 BURs. It has, with the view of enhancing reporting to the UNFCCC. It has engaged 141 non-annexed parties, which represents 92% of all non-Annex 1 parties, 96% of all ADCs, and 100% of all SIDs. So you can see that it had a really wide reach, and it has been really a global program for support. It has established also 13 MRV networks with the aim of promoting peer-to-peer exchange, training, and supports. It had also worked in collaboration with international partners to develop 12 guidelines, studies, and toolkits, and translated 10 training materials. It has developed also 14 best practice cases from beneficiary countries and prepared a global assessment of GHG capacity and contributed to gender mainstreaming in national communications and BURs. So this is just in a nutshell a few of the main results of the Global Support Program, but also some of its main results is this the community of practice that it had developed, and the partnership that it has also developed with many partners. Many of them are around the table today. So I wanted to recognize the collaboration that we had with the UNFCCC in many of the activities that we have done with the Global Support Program. Through, for instance, we have prepared with the UNFCCC and the GEIDCO compendium of on greenhouse gas baseline monitoring for the energy supply sector. We have done many workshops, among which one in Bhutan, for instance, on mitigation analysis, and many others. It was also the one of the main collaborations were the collaboration for the creation of the MRV group of France. So it has been a very fruitful collaboration that we hope to continue in this next phase of the project. We had developed also many other collaborations with the partners and countries and the donors. So this project had really created a community for transparency, and we will carry that with us in the next phase. So now for the new project. So it's called the Global Support It's called the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, the Global Support Program. And it has, as I mentioned, integrated the two previous projects that were merged and continued. And the main reason for that is to avoid overlaps and duplication in activities and continue supporting countries with their reporting and transparency obligation to UNFCCC through a one-stop shop modality. The project will start in June 2022. So we are starting freshly, and we are now ready to operate. And the project will run until the end of Q4 2026. So the project is implemented by UNEP and executed by UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center and funded by GEF. So this project is to be continuing or providing further support and more ad hoc support to complement the other projects that are funded by GEF, as she has mentioned, some of the enabling activities, capacity building initiative for transparency, and many others that she has mentioned. So this would be complementing these other projects at the global level. So the overall objective of the project would be to provide global streamlined support, capacity building, and coordination to help developing countries meet enhanced transparency requirements under Article 13 of the Paris Agreement. And it will focus on assisting countries submit the last BORs and support the transition to the BTRs, and hopefully have many BTRs before the deadline of 2024. As I mentioned before many times, so we will be capitalizing on the learning from the previous phases and both of the Cbit platform and the GSP. And one of the first actions that we are currently doing is the integration of the GSP website and the Cbit platform and develop new functionalities. So this new integrated platform aspires to be a one-stop shop for transparency and will foster peer-to-peer exchange for climate transparency practitioners and experts in developing countries, regionally and globally. So it will also provide matchmaking opportunities between support seekers and support providers, and will display relevant information on the status of climate transparency at a national and global level through the inclusion of project status information, global reports or self-assessment, assessed needs, etc. So the project will establish, the platform also will establish a unified space for up-to-date events, webinars, and resources relevant to climate transparency, and will provide information on ongoing and upcoming in-country, regional, and global transparency initiatives. So this platform is not supposed to be only for the project, but it will be open for all countries and all support providers, so that information in transparency can be found in one place, and all support providers are welcome to use the platform when ready to advertise their events, if they are launching a new initiatives, and so on. So the aim is for it to be really a platform for the use of all practitioners in transparency without discrimination. So we will also, based on the experience of the GSP, we will continue the network concept that has been one of the main features or the main successful features of the GSP. So the GSP had 13 MRV networks. We have streamlined that in this new phase, and we will have 9 networks, mainly regional and by language. So these networks will be coordinated by network coordinators that we will be recruiting very soon. So these network coordinators will be from the regions and speaking the language of the countries that they will be supporting. So the idea is really to provide the support as close to where the needs are as possible. So we will encourage and facilitate peer learning and South-South exchange through these networks, but also through exchange with other networks and globally. We will carry gap assessment in each of the networks and elaborate annual work plans based on the needs identified and expressed by countries. We will carry regional and national capacity building and networking workshops and events. We will provide direct support to the immediate needs of countries and really focus on the support where it is needed, when it is needed. And we will help also improve with reporting to the UNFCCC through review of the draft transparency reports. So we will also play a role in accelerating access to funding for BTRs or combined BTRs in CEEZ from GEF through supporting countries with their requests for funding. And we will support with the institutional arrangements those countries who need such support. We will also, and that's very important, work in synergy with other initiatives and organizations not to duplicate efforts and to have bigger impact. And also, as GIZ was saying before, this is an area where the needs are huge, and we would need the collaboration and the efforts from everyone to be able to support countries work on their transparency reports and transition into the BTR in the required timelines by the UNFCCC. So as you see, there is a lot of activities that needs to be done, but it is, and I wanted to focus on that, it would be a bottom-up approach. So we will not come and say, hey, you country, you need this. The needs will be gathered from the countries themselves, and we will respond to countries' requests for support directly. So here you have like the great lines of the support or the areas of support that will be provided, but the details of it will be provided. We will have them when we hear the requests from countries and their specific needs. So from this forum, I would like to advertise the fact that now we are ready for business. And please, if you need some support on transparency, do not hesitate to contact us. We will have a specific email address, but in the meantime, please do not hesitate to contact me in this email address that you see in the screen. I believe the UNFCCC Secretariat will be also sharing the presentation, and we would be happy to work with you and to support both countries and work with other partners to support countries in their transparency efforts. Thank you very much. Back to you, Marlon.
Thank you very much, Fatima, for sharing with us the latest developments on the Global Support Program. And you mentioned something quite important, building the community of transparency. And that is something that is very close to one of the key objectives of UNFCCC through the Group of Friends initiative to facilitate that and improve the coherency and coordination of activities amongst those that are in the community, and to continue expanding and building that community as well. And so now I would like to move to our next speaker, Dr. Henning Wüster, who is going to share with us the latest happenings with the ICAT. Thank you. Dr. Henning, over to you.
Thank you very much, Marlon, and thanks to the Climate Change Secretariat, for inviting us to speak here briefly. So ICAT is not so much focused on supporting countries with their direct report preparation, but we are supporting countries to build transparency frameworks, which then they can use for the preparation of reports. And we believe that's very important if you want to be ready for continuous reporting every second year as of 2024. So if you take next, please. Just a quick snapshot of who we are. We are a partnership of many institutions, above all made possible by our donors, Germany, Italy, and 2 philanthropic foundations. And I won't go through the list. You can look at it at the slides afterwards. Please go to the next. We are, above all, a partnership of countries. So we work with over 50 countries across all continents, over 40 of them with direct country support projects. And we also have now 2 regional hubs in Central Asia and in Central Africa, where we are setting up a center and a network of the countries from that region. And you see the map and probably recognize your own country for many of the participants in the audience. If you go to the next, please. 3 areas of work. One is, and the most important is, of course, the direct country support and the support through the regional initiatives that we have been creating. The second, that's more a means to an end, is the creation of the ICAT toolbox, and I'll talk a bit about that because the ICAT tools are all freely available to anybody, but they also form, of course, a focus of the ICAT projects and the ICAT support activities to the countries and the regions. And then last, but certainly not least, knowledge sharing. And there I can echo a lot what was said by previous speakers, that we very much like to engage and collaborate with other initiatives in helping to create that global community of practice of transparency experts, which I'm sure many of you form part of. Please go to the next. So the ICAT toolbox contains 3 main elements. The first is a set of policy assessment guides. That's really the origin of ICAT, which was created in Paris to support the new part of the agenda that is coming out of Paris, which is the forward-looking part of the transparency and reporting requirements under the convention. So being able to assess policies, to report on policies, and to track policies. And I'll go further into that theme. The second set of elements in the toolbox are tools that actually facilitate data management and data use. They help to apply some of the ICAT assessment guides. And the third element then are modeling and assessment tools. If you continue, please, then we come to those aspects that I want to highlight, give you just an illustration of some of the purpose of the tools that we have. And I go one by one through them. So if you continue to the next. The first set of tools focuses on design of policies. Evidence-based policy is really our key focus, as I mentioned before. And of course, that has been very important as countries were now updating their NDCs and used information and data to make sure that NDCs are very much linked to the realities in the country and build on those. Of course, starting with an assessment of the GHG reduction potential in different sectors, where we have a number of guides, but then also looking at different levels of governance down to the subnational and how to engage the non-state actors where we also have an assessment guide. If you go to the next, and the second area that I want to highlight is the planning and the tracking of progress for NDC implementation. One of the tools that actually was developed by UNEP CCC is the modeling tool called GASMO, which is one of the most popular tools in the ICAT toolbox because it gives a very simple way of looking at mitigation options across all sectors, and we have developed that with the help of a country that applied the tool into an NDC tracking framework, which is now used by several countries and helps to engage all the sectors that need to be part of an NDC implementation and tracking part. We also have developed a tool that focuses on the transport sector, since that is one of those sectors which many countries have been struggling with. It needs the collection of data from a large number of actors, and the tool that we have now developed and are launching in a number of countries enables that data collection and then using the engagement of those stakeholders to assess policies in the transport sector. If you go to the next, an important aspect in moving NDC implementation forward is financing. And this is an area that countries have come to ICAT with in wanting to take their MRV framework to the next level. Often we have worked with them to establish an MRV framework, use it for NDC development, and then countries were stuck in actually moving to implementation because they couldn't link the MRV framework to the financing. So this is a new area that we have started on. We have initiated the development of a climate finance tracking framework, and we have already 3 countries now starting to implement that methodology, and that will, of course, also then feed into the reporting, since it's a very important part of the enhanced transparency framework. And I also want to mention in this context that we are developing a guide on Article 6 and linking that to the accounting requirements under Article 6. That will be also ready in September. If you go to the final point under this, these 4 points, then this focuses on the link to sustainable development impacts, which is a large focus. So we have an assessment guide on this, and now a number of tools that allow going further into a detailed assessment in, for instance, the transport sector, but also economy-wide in order to use climate action as part of the economic recovery out of the economic crisis from the pandemic, assess the economic potential from mitigation actions and integrate climate action into development planning. Again, here forthcoming is a guide on just transitions, monitoring just transitions. This is something that we are working with 2 African countries on, and that will be available towards the end of the year, but we have already these just transition processes underway in those 2 African countries we are working with. And last but not least, we've now finalized a guide that helps to integrate air pollution and climate MRV, which again is one of those elements where you can easily track the local benefits of climate mitigation if you have the right data in place, which is not very challenging and actually quite rewarding in order to target your mitigation actions. The last slide I wanted to show, if you go to the next one, just to give you a snapshot of 3 of the over 50 countries that we are working with. And it's quite arbitrary choice. I said we want to have one from each of the main continents. So Costa Rica is one example where we worked on sustainable development impacts, which they understood that as a basis for the transformational change that they require to achieve their decarbonization targets. And they have integrated this now systematically into their climate data system, CINAMEC, which, by the way, is a data system that through ICAT they are offering to any country that is interested to apply it in its country. It's open source software, and ICAT supports the application and implementation to the national level. The Fiji project was just finished very recently, focused on the agriculture sector, going into establishing a first robust inventory and identifying some options, mitigation options in the agriculture sector, and assessing the impacts of policies that they have in place so that agriculture could become a sector in a future updated NDC for Fiji. And last but not least, Ghana as an example where we implemented an NDC tracking framework. Actually, it was Ghana that developed that NDC tracking framework based on the GASMO modeling. So just a snapshot, and with that I want to finish. If you want to hear more, especially hear from some of the ICAT countries, please join us here in this room tomorrow at 6:30 when we have several ICAT countries present their experience. This is a side event tomorrow, 6:30, that we are organizing together with Liberia and the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henning-Wüster. And it is indeed quite a comprehensive toolbox that ICAT has put together, and one that is really, I think, valuable, that the feedback from countries are that it's quite a valuable toolbox that is helping them not only collect the data that they need, but also then to analyze that data and generate inputs that can go into their decision making for the policies and measures that they want to take. And with that then tying that in with the tracking the progress and achievement of their NDCs, but also on the linkages to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you very much. And now I would like to move to our next speaker, Mr. Prasad, who's going to share with us a tool that they have been developing called the Capacity Building Tool. So I hand over to Mr. Prasad. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlon. Thank you, United Nations Climate Secretariat, for inviting me for this very important discussions. Greetings, everyone. As I introduced myself before, I'm Sumit Prasad from the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. I work in the area of transparency and capacity building, and basically looking into some of the issues and trying to identify some of the solutions surrounding these critical issues. Next slide, please. Before starting, just briefly introducing our organization, the Council on Energy, Environment and Water is among Asia's leading policy research think tank. We use data, integrated analysis, and strategic outreach to explain the change and use and reuse and misuse of the resources. Next slide, please. So, as we all know, we have agreed upon the MPGs of the Paris Agreement, as well as the common reporting tables and common tableau formats of the inventory, as well as the NDC aspects. But then what do we need now? What we need now is basically to understand our capacity constraints well, so that we will be able to formulate our improvement plans, so that we will be able to identify the usage of the flexibilities provisions, as well as it will provide a better inputs to a BUR and BTR, and then also track the progress of our capacity building efforts. Next slide, please. Continue. Yeah. In order to answer some of these questions, we at the Council have been working towards developing a capacity building assessment matrix. This tool is basically an Excel-based model which does an objective analysis of the qualitative disclosures on capacity building related to transparency in the BUR as well as the IC analysis that has been undergoing. Now, with this help of this objective analysis, we aim to identify the baseline capacity of the country to report on the elements of the transparency and also understand what are the needs are, and also, try to understand what are the capacity-related challenges that might come in. Can you just continue? In continuation to this particular exercise of the capacity building assessment matrix, we are working now. This year, we started collaborating with the CGE and try to expand this tool based upon the agreed guidelines of the ETF and try to look more comprehensively on some of the aspects of the CBAM tool. Next slide, please. Yeah. Just to give a brief overview of the tool that we have sort of developed, it comprises of the 3 key building blocks. The first and the foremost building block is basically the capacity indicators, which is at the heart of this entire tool. What we have done is that we have done an extensive literature review on the best practices that has been adopted globally to report on the elements of the transparency, basically inventory and mitigation and all the other stuff. And then we have sort of made them in form of the capacity indicators. And these we have made it to as minute objective as possible. On these capacity indicators, we have sort of undertaken 3 key assessments. As you can see, that is the building block 2, which is the first assessment is the capacity assessment, where we have done, basically we analyze based upon the data that is available in the public domain, and we sort of analyze on a Likert scale scoring system, what is the capacity of on one particular country, whether it is moderate, high, or low, based upon the disclosure that is made in the public domain. Secondly, on the second assessment that we have, that is a need assessment. On this, we look at the disclosures that have been made in the BUR. To what extent, the needs have been identified in the BUR for the capacity indicators that we have developed. So this tells us that what are the areas where the countries have expressed their needs and what are the areas where countries have not identified their needs. And lastly, the support assessment, where we sort of explore that what are the areas where support has been received for the capacity indicators that we have found, right? And this tells us, basically, and this we get it from the GEF project, the proposals that the countries basically submit to the GEF. And from that, we sort of analyze that what are links with the capacity indicators and identify that what are the capacity indicators support has been received and where the support has not been received. And in the end, when we sort of, merge these 3 sort of outcomes of the 3 assessment, we analyze for each indicator, we get about 5 different scenarios, right? One, let's start with the very first scenario. As you can see, in a case where we have not received any support for a capacity indicator, but then there exists a very sound capacity. That means there was already an existing capacity for that capacity indicator, right? But in a case where we have received the support and the capacity is high, that means the capacity has been built and sustained for some level. But in cases where the support has been received, but the capacity is moderate or low, that means there are capacity challenges. There might be some retention issues, and we need to look into that. And lastly, in the case where we have not received the support and we have not identified the support, so those are some of the areas where we need to reconsider and think whether the support is required or not. Next slide, please. Yeah. Just to briefly deep dive inside the capacity indicator aspect, the capacity indicators are broadly consist of 3 key aspects. One is the institutional capacity, where we talk about the formal arrangement or the processes which would create the enabling environment for the reporting. The second one is the technical aspects, where we talk about the methodologies and the guidelines. And the third one is the procedural capacity, where we're looking at the enforcement capacity. Basically, we're just checking to what extent the countries are able to report based upon the existing guidelines. And in the current context of the newer tool that we're developing with the CGE, we have moved from knowledge capacity to technical and technological capacity, because we're now also looking into the technological aspects, basically the sensors or any other technology that can be used towards reporting on any of the elements. Next slide, please. Just to showcase what the expected outcome would look like, this is just a template. So as you can see, for each area of the reporting, we'll get some level of indication that as a need assessment, the orange one represents that these are the indicators. I suppose if there are 100 indicators, so 74% of the needs were identified for the inventory sector, and for 26% yields were not identified. Similarly, we'll get it for the other areas reporting also. And also same is the case for the support assessment. I just like to a little bit focus on the capacity assessment. You can see the 3 different colors here. That would tell us the green basically represents the higher capacity, and the yellow one represents the moderate capacity, and the red one represents the lower capacity. So these are the outcomes or the expected outcomes you could sort of visualize when we look at the 3 different assessments independently. Next slide, please. But when we look at combining the outcomes of the 3 assessments, suppose we take it for any one area of the reporting, we can get a deeper, more insights about what is basically happening for each indicator, right? Suppose if you take it for the institutional capacity, it seems to be like 17% of the indicators are there where we have not even identified as critical support. We have not even identified as areas. And similarly, 39% would be the areas where we've received the support, but then our capacity is not as high. And then 18% would be the area where we would be like, we've already had the domestic capacity. Now, while these are just numbers based upon the qualitative analysis, we'll also get a very deeper insights based upon what all things these 18%, 39% covers. So we'll get a clarity about, whether it's inventory, whether it's energy sector, whether it's tier 2, and all those detailed information we'll get it from this Excel-based outcomes. Yeah, I mean, it's a very comprehensive Excel tool, and I like to sort of, have those discussions, even bilateral discussions, if any of you are interested. But most probably, who all could be benefited out of it is basically the developing countries. I believe that this would help them understand better their capacity constraints and also serve as a very critical inputs to the BUR. And they can help in developing the improvement plans and also understand the application of the flexibilities considering the BTR coming soon. I also feel that this would be a very important inputs to the donors where they could feed into the Cbit proposal. Some of the critical inputs could feed into the Cbit proposals, and also the UNFCCC where they can support countries towards understanding where the technical capacities would be needed. With this, I conclude. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and you can also reach out to us in the email address that's showing. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Sumit, for sharing with us. Indeed, it will be a very helpful tool from what you've shared with us here today. And I think as we are moving to the implementation of the enhanced transparency framework, the evaluation of capacity constraints and determining improvement areas will be one of the key aspects that developing countries will need to take up and report on in their biannual transparency reports. Now, in the interest of time, I want to move on to the second round of speakers. So I'd like to thank the first round of speakers for sharing with us their presentations. And we may take some questions at the end, but you also have opportunity to engage after the event with the panelists as well. So thank you very much, and let's move on to the next round of speakers. So I invite them to join me on the panel. Thank you. So thank you very much. And now we, in round 2, I have 3 speakers for you. The first is Ms. Melan Ho from the UNFCCC GIR CAST program. And then I have online Mr. Oliver Ruff, who's from the Buildings Performance Institute Europe. And thereafter, I have Ms. Verena Flores from GIZ, the Advancing Transport Climate Strategies in Rapidly Motorizing Countries program. And first, I would like to hand over the floor to Milan to take us through what the CAST program is doing. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues and everyone. I am Milan Oh. I am an associate researcher at Greenhouse Gas Inventory and Research Center of Korea, which is also known as GIR. It is such a great pleasure of mine to meet with everyone and also to have this valuable opportunity to introduce one of GIR's international cooperation programs, which is UNFCCC GIR CAS program on greenhouse gases. Next slide, please. No, thank you. GIR, in collaboration with the UNFCCC Secretariat and with support from the PATPA Secretariat, organizes the Climate Action and Support Transparency Training Program every year. The program is a 3 to 4 week intensive training on greenhouse gas inventory preparation for national experts in developing countries. It takes place in Seoul, Korea, from July to August. Trainees are shortlisted and selected through the screening process, which includes submission of application form and an interview. Costs, including flights and accommodation, are funded by organizers. We do receive quite a number of inquiries about the cost, whether it is supported, and our answer is yes. We provide return flights and accommodation for the whole training duration, for the whole training period. Next slide, please. Then what was the very starting point of this program? What triggered GIR and the UNFCCC Secretariat to develop this training program? Well, it goes back to 2017. As parties have agreed to move towards the enhanced transparency framework under the Paris Agreement, the UNFCCC Secretariat and GIR joined hands with each other to deliver the training program under the UNFCCC CAST umbrella, in which transparency agenda is highlighted. This is when the program was renamed as UNFCCC GIR CAST program. In that same year, GIR expanded cooperation with one of its most valuable partners, the PATPA Secretariat. PATPA is the Partnership on Transparency in the Paris Agreement, of which Korea is a founding member together with South Africa and Germany. Throughout the whole process of the training program, the UNFCCC and PATPA Secretariat play a significant role and provide substantial supports, including sponsorship of trainees and mobilization of great experts using its extensive network. GIR greatly appreciates such strong commitment of the secretariats and always finds it a great pleasure to work with UNFCCC and PATPA colleagues. Next slide, please. As we are committed to providing trainees with invaluable opportunities to have extensive learning experiences, GIR invites renowned figures from the industry and academia from both public and private sectors who know more about that specific topic more than anyone in Korea, while the UNFCCC and PATPA Secretariat, using its diverse pool of experts, invite best professionals from all over the world as lecturers. We are also having a strong focus on networking, as trainees of different backgrounds who have different experiences and different views will learn from each other by sharing knowledge to have deeper understanding through a supportive network. Next slide, please. To encourage to use the most of such supportive network, our curriculum in overall involves individual and group presentation, interactive discussion, and hands-on exercises. We have no doubt that with this approach of learning by doing in close collaboration, our trainees will further develop their expertise by helping them each other, which at the same time will ensure that no one is left behind in this learning process. Next slide, please. Trainees will be attending the International Greenhouse Gas Conference, aka IGC, which is organized by GIR in Korea every year. GIR is organizing a special session for trainees this year. So nominated trainees will be at the conference as a presenter and panelists representing each continent. We are very much looking forward to a remarkable learning progress of trainees through such practical experiences. Next slide, please. We do have some fun parts as well. So there will be a day tour for cultural experience of traditional and modern Korea, and also a site visit to facilities which demonstrate efforts by local governments and companies to optimize the effective use of resources and thus to reduce emissions for a green and sustainable city. Next slide, please. Now, the very last part of the program, Award of Excellence and Graduation Ceremony. Trainees who make wonderful achievements and show outstanding performances will be given an award to recognize their excellence and great commitment to the program. We are very excited to continue meeting with our trainees this year in person after 2 years of virtual training. For future programs, I would like to ask for kind and continued cooperation from our colleagues and national focal points. As there has been a considerable number of individuals who missed the deadline for submission of applications due to late notice, it would be much appreciated if embassies and national contact point offices could facilitate information sharing about the opening of the program in every April. We always welcome applications from experts with great potential from your country. For further details, you can visit the website or contact me by email. I deleted few slides and due to time constraints and to make my presentation as short as possible. So I did not have a chance to talk about lecture topics or details about our programs, our curriculum. So if you are interested in the program and want to know about it, want to know more about it, please feel free to tell me. I will be very happy to provide more information and answer any questions you have. Thank you very much once again for allowing me to have this opportunity to introduce the UNFCCC GIR CAS program on greenhouse gases. Thank you.
Thank you, Milan, for that and for also making sure that we can stick within the time frames. And well, you've heard it from Milan, don't miss the deadline to apply. And also, I'd like to thank her for showing us how this program is enhancing competency in the area of preparing GHG inventories, and also providing that opportunity for the developing countries to meet and share their experiences and share their best practices as well. And now I'd like to move on to our next speaker, which is Mr. Oliver Ruff, and he is joining us from the virtual platform. So on to you, Oliver. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Marlon, thank you very much for the invitation. I hope you can hear me well and the sound is good. And if you could please start my presentation, that would be fantastic. To show the slides. While this is being organized, I just want to introduce myself very quickly. I'm Oliver Ruff. I'm the Executive Director of BPIE. BPIE is a non-profit think tank focusing on policy analysis in climate change mitigation, in energy efficiency, in renewables, with a specific focus on the building sector. And in that capacity, BPIE developed together with GIZ and the Program for Energy Efficiency in Buildings a compendium to measure and mitigate the climate impact of buildings and construction, which was published by the UNFCCC Secretariat a few months ago. And in my presentation today, I want to describe to you and highlight to you what this compendium is about and how it can be useful for policymakers and practitioners in mitigating the climate change impact of buildings and construction. The next slide, please. So the compendium is really structured in a way to be a very practical guidance document. It wants to support the development and implementation of NDCs. It wants to, of course, contribute to the implementation of the enhanced transparency framework and in that respect also support the global stocktake process. And the compendium is structured in two big parts. The first part describes the sources of greenhouse gas emissions and the methodologies which can be used to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions coming from buildings and construction. And then the second part is very practically looking at strategies, at policies, at measures to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from that sector. And it really addresses practitioners, local governance, local policymakers, construction companies, but also, of course, national policymakers who will have to develop the national climate plans or have to revise those plans. The compendium also includes over 30 country examples, so real-life policy experiences. It includes a glossary, an annex, and a bibliography, and as such is hopefully a very useful document. The next slide, please. And I will now give you some indication about the importance of addressing greenhouse gas emissions from the sector. What this graph shows you, on the top line, the orange line, is how the floor space globally has grown in the past decade. In the last decade, we see a growth of over 20% of the floor space. And that, of course, leads to a variety of impacts. The growth in floor space is for sure driven by the growth in population, which you see there with the green line. But the growth in population is not as big as the growth in floor space, which means that on a global average and on a per capita basis, each and every individual on this planet is using and occupying more floor space at about than 10 years ago. Now, this also means that energy consumption is increasing and therefore greenhouse gas emissions are increasing from the sector. And you have the two blue lines, the lighter blue line and the darker blue line at the bottom of this graph, which is showing this development. The good news is that these two lines are not growing as steeply as the population line or the floor space line. But nevertheless, both lines are growing in absolute terms, which means that the climate impact of the sector is increasing, and therefore we need to do something urgently about that. Next slide, please. If we try to quantify the impact, what we can see is that in total, about 37% of global energy-related CO2 emissions can be attributed to buildings and construction. If we subdivide that by residential and non-residential buildings, we see that about 17% is caused through residential buildings, about 10% through non-residential buildings, and in both categories we have direct and indirect emissions, and a total of about 10% is directly linked to the construction activity itself. So the total global impact comes to 37% of energy-related CO2 emissions in 2020. And the next slide, please. If we want to now really measure the impact and quantify the greenhouse gas emissions of the sector, the compendium is providing very clear and straightforward guidance. The compendium provides its recommendations on the methodology based on the IPCC guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories. It applies the principle of source accounting, and it distinguishes between direct and indirect emissions. On the right-hand side, you can see this quite complex graph, which is a part of the compendium, giving you the different sources of greenhouse gas emissions for the sector and giving everyone a guidance how to account for these. The next slide, please. The next slide is talking about the 4 stages of a building. because it is very important to be aware of the different life cycle stages. We have a product stage, the first stage, where construction materials are produced, where the glass, the cement, the steel, the bricks are produced, which will make up a future building. The second stage is the construction phase itself, when a building is being erected or renovated. The third phase is the use phase, when occupants, tenants will use the building, whether it's for residential purposes or for working purposes or what have you. And then the fourth stage is the end of life stage. And if we look at the relative importance, the relative share of emissions coming from the different stages, we see that over 70% of the total greenhouse gas emissions are occurring in the third phase, in the use phase. So it is, of course, important to address the emissions in that use phase first with a priority, but it doesn't mean that we should neglect the other phases, because they also have a significant greenhouse gas and climate change impact. But the use phase is the biggest and most important phase. Next slide, please. The compendium also talks about recommended policies and measures which policymakers can take to reduce the climate impact, to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions coming from the sector. And the opportunities are broad, they are wide. They range from purely voluntary measures, which you can see on the left side of this image, to strictly mandatory measures on the very right side. And so from left to right, you have an increasing degree of obligation. Voluntary measures, for example, can include simply awareness raising through campaigns, but also through labeling of buildings, voluntary labeling of buildings. They can include capacity building, training, and so on. Benchmarking is a very important tool to compare the energy performance and the climate change performance of individual buildings or groups of buildings. And then we can introduce more and more regulatory measures up to providing energy performance standards for buildings, or to ban inefficient products, ban inefficient appliances, up to mandatory renovation of the existing building stock. And the compendium really provides many examples on these different policy and measures opportunities which policymakers have at their hands. The next slide, please. As I said, we have over 30 different examples. This is just a short snapshot of all the boxes we have with examples in the compendium to give you a very quick overview. It's probably too small to read on the screen, but as I said, we have clearly defined text boxes in the relevant chapters in the compendium. And with that, I already want to close my presentation. If you could please move to the final slide, because of course we are providing a link to the compendium. I'm sure we are going to share this presentation, and the compendium is available on the UNFCCC Secretariat website, where other compendiums are available as well. And thank you very much. I also want to make a quick announcement. We will have a deep dive site event on the buildings and construction sector, where we'll go into the details of the compendium again on Saturday afternoon at 4:45 in the Kaminzimmer at the Convention Center. So maybe you have an opportunity to join us there. Thank you very much again for listening.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for sharing with us this latest document which has been produced, which is the compendium for GHG baselines and monitoring for the building sector. And as we've seen from the recent NDC synthesis report that was published, many countries identified in the NDCs the need to undertake climate actions in the building and construction sector. And it is widely recognized that the climate actions needed in this sector can only be realized using the multilateral approach, because most of the goods and services in the sector is sourced globally. And we hope that countries will find this document as a useful tool to aid in their decision making. So thank you very much. And now I'd like to move to our final speaker for today, Ms. Verena Flores. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Marlon. Thank you for the invitation to the UNFCCC. Not easy to be the last presentation in such a long line, so please still bear with us for the last 10 minutes of this event. So next slide, please. You just heard about the importance of the building sector, and now I'm going to convince you of the importance of the transport sector, which is, of course, also is crucial to decarbonize if we want to achieve our Paris agreement. And currently, we are unfortunately not on track. You see the projections, transport emissions are still rising. And so we have to take really urgent and strong action in the next decade to get these emissions down to what we need. Next slide, please. And today I'm going to speak about one project that is being carried out by the German Development Corporation, GIZ. And we strongly believe in this message. So if we don't have the data, if we don't have the information, it will be very hard to take the right actions in this transport sector, which is extremely fragmented, which has a lot of small entities. So we have to have the information right in order to take the right steps to decarbonize. Next slide, please. And so in our project, what we do is to support countries to build up their MRV frameworks, so their monitoring, reporting, and verification frameworks for the sector. And this is needed not only for international reporting obligations, but also for decision making. So deciding on the appropriate measures, reporting, but then also evaluating what is actually effective and what has contributed to reducing emissions. So we are accompanying our project partners, and these are especially the ministries of transport that are not so close to the international climate negotiations and the international climate realm as the ministries of environment. So we focus on this group and we try to support them in each of these steps. Next slide, please. So we are working with a small number of countries. We are a rather small project. And these countries that you see here, Morocco, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Uganda, and Vietnam, they're all countries that still don't have very high transport emissions, but which are rapidly motorizing. So this is becoming an issue in the future. And so it's important to work with them from the beginning on. But we also work with a whole range of other countries that are interested in these MRV questions and transparency questions for the transport sector. Next slide, please. Click once again, please. So at national level, we work on all these data questions, how to collect and how to build systems to collect reliable data, how to organize the institutions around this effort, and a lot of capacity building is, of course, part of it. At the international level, we do also work on global outreach and peer learning, so bringing these different countries in touch with each other, working on methodologies and frameworks and available tools so that countries can access them and can use them for their systems, and also help them through this to get access to climate finance. So in the last 3 slides, I will just give you a few examples of our international or global level activities. Next slide, please. So one tool that we developed is the tracker for climate strategies in transport to get track of NDCs and long-term strategies and see what role transport is playing in there. We have an open source database, so if you're interested in knowing which countries are working or committing to climate action in transport, you can go to this database and find all the information, filter according to regions or according to measures, subsectors, knowing who's working on rail or on freight or on urban passenger transport. and which countries have given themselves targets in these areas. So that is one activity that we're doing at the global level to increase the knowledge about transport and climate actions. Next one. Then we have been doing a lot of training activities in the last years. As you can see, they have been mostly virtual. But before the pandemic, we also worked with the UNFCCC together to have a Pan-African training on MRV and greenhouse gas accounting in the transport sector in Nairobi. And we have been doing these kind of trainings for the Latin American region, for our partner countries in Morocco and in the Dominican Republic. And it's building a lot of capacities in this very complex sector. And finally, last slide, please. We have also been working together with the UNFCCC on developing this compendium, but in our case, for the transport sector. So here you can see all the different policy areas that we are tackling or that we are working on in this compendium. Pricing policies, different standards, efficiency programs, and there are two new chapters that have been developed in the last year to also respond to the global dynamic of urban freight and also ride-hailing, which are rapidly expanding throughout the world. So I invite you. We are about to publish this new version of the compendium, and I invite you to download it and have a look at all these different measures and how we can actually account for them. And this is just last slide. To get in touch with our team based in Bonn. We also have colleagues in Morocco, in Chile, and in other countries. Please feel free to get in touch if you want to exchange on these topics in the transport sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Verena, for sharing with us the work that GIZ is doing. Indeed, it's a small team that you have, but a very, very efficient, effective team, and doing some really amazing work. And this sector, the transport sector, is another very challenging sector. It's not easy to make decisions on the policies and measures to take within a specific country context. And so GIZ is putting in a lot of effort to provide the methodologies and the tools so that countries can collect the data and assess the data and use that as inputs into their decision-making process. So thank you very much again. And I think we've run out of time for questions, but you can submit your questions to the chat function on the virtual platform, but also via the side events page, as well as through the details that the speakers have shared. And we are all very much looking forward to receiving your questions and to support you and help you more. So a round of applause for all my panelists, and thank you very much for attending.